to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime, even if court does go pretty much 2 hours, or well, maybe an hour overtime, and we had to blow up our entire show. Thank goodness for Josh Ritter on the West Coast. You all know Josh. It's just going to be me and him tonight, breaking down Boone, Sarah Boone. For those who do not know, I was listening because I was driving back up to Orlando from Miami today. So I caught the entire day's testimony. I was in the courtroom beginning right after lunch for Detective Copsel's portion of the testimony today. Josh Ritter, he is a criminal defense attorney. He is a former award-winning prosecutor of the year, and he is the host of Courtroom Confidential. And if you are not watching Courtroom or listening and watching Courtroom Confidential, you are missing out. So make sure you subscribe to Courtroom Confidential. So before I get to Josh, just a very kind of not so quick intro. So some interesting things happened at the end of the day today, and I'm not even sure that the pool camera with Court TV was still rolling on it. Also, fair warning, I'm in a Fisher Price hotel, like our equipment, and the equipment, the internet is, the Wi-Fi is teetering. If I go out, I'll come back on my cell phone somehow. Look at this tiny grandma, Josh. She loves your channel.
Oh, good.
Where'd that go? Where'd that go? Look at this. She says you never revealed that.
I don't do enough self-promotion.
Here we go. Hi, Josh. I love your channel. There you go. From Tiny Grandma.
Thank you.
So we're going to break this all down, but a couple interesting things. The defense looked and Sarah looked much more worried by the end of the day today than they did at the beginning. At the very, very end of the day, a couple things happened. I jumped in the elevator with the entire defense team, where I always learn some things that I probably shouldn't be learning, but they are headed over to the jail at 9:30 p.m., which is interesting because James Owens has been saying it takes forever for her to be woken up in the morning at 2:30. She has to sit there for hours, and then she doesn't get back to the jail till about 9. So he and Tony Henderson, second chair, are going over there. And I assume that the jury selection person, who's like a consultant, is also going, because he was speaking to her, as well as Tony Henderson's daughter. I don't know how many people they're going to allow to see Sarah, but at the very least, it's going to be James Owen and Tony Henderson. And I tried to get James to speak today, but he was in a huge rush out. I think he'll accommodate me. So stand by for a potential interview tomorrow. Josh, let's just pick it up right there. I mean, this is a woman who seems a bit unhinged in the courtroom. And tomorrow, Judge Owens Judge Cranick, Owens' defensor, Judge Cranick revealed that Sarah Boone will be giving her narrative testimony sometime between 10 and 10:30 in the morning. So, Josh, what is happening tonight with her defense team?
Strangely enough, you would think that they would be prepared to know exactly what she's going to be testifying to, but I am sure they are still hammering those final details out. And that sounds like you caught the meeting before the meeting when they're on their way over there to speak with her. I will say, I do not envy the position that either of those attorneys are in. One, they're defending a really horrible case. Two, they've got a client that, was created in the seventh level of torment herself. But dealing with any client when they're in custody, when you're going through a trial, is awful stuff to deal with, because you just don't have any time. So you're trying to sneak moments where you can with your client while you're on a break. But, you know, when they go for lunch, they whisk her off. She's off to somewhere else in some holding cell, and maybe you get a few moments here or there. So they're going to try to take as much advantage of the few precious moments that they have to talk with her, because of kind of the developments that have taken place as this trial has unfolded. And it's not looking good for her. I mean, she is really going to have to perform some, you know, Barnum and Bailey's next level high wire act here to try to convince any of these jurors to have a question in their mind about reasonable doubt. And really, I think the most difficult part is to try to come off as sympathetic when you realize the last moments of this man's life were borderline torture. I mean, I think they are torture. I mean, the medical examiner talked about positional asphyxia. He's covered in bruises. We've got evidence that he may have been tossed down the stairs. We've got evidence that she may have whacked his hand as he tried to get out with a baseball bat. So this sounds like a man whose final moments of his life were awful. And she's got to get up there and try to convince these jurors. This whole case does come down to her. I think the prosecution has put on a fully convincing case, but it comes down to her in the sense that if she is able to convince any of those jurors of her position, of her fear, of whatever theory they're going to stick with, she may have a puncher's chance. But short of that, if they find anything about her to be untruthful, if they find anything about her to be unbelievable, it really rises and falls with how she does tomorrow. So I think that's what you're seeing is those last minute preparations.
Yeah, we're going to do kind of a combo here of questions, breaking down what happened in court today, my observations, as I see my Wi-Fi flickering in the distance. But Josh, let's go to this question here. Do you sense a plea appeal from Sarah Boone tonight in advance of her having to testify? Where does that stand? I mean, she was offered this plea deal. Any chance that there's an 11th hour granting that she accepts it?
There's always a chance. I imagine that plea deal expired, was taken off the table, though, the second they swore that jury in and started opening statements. I'm sure that was a last-ditch effort to save themselves all the trouble of going through this trial. So that may not be available to her. But, you know, stranger things have happened where if a client really feels like things went completely sideways for them, they can beg at the prosecution mercy to have that re-extended to them, and she may take it. But if we've learned anything about her, I really feel there's no chance. I think she's still convinced that she's somehow going to get out of this whole thing. And maybe some of what's taken place during trial might have changed her mind, but I don't think they're doing that.
Yeah. Joel, do you know who caused the disturbance after lunch, and what did she do to get kicked out of the courtroom? I don't think she had anything to do with anybody in the courtroom. She was just an odd bird, for lack of a better way to put it. And she was just saying things very loudly and distractingly. This was even before the judge came in. Then there was a sidebar. I have a feeling that these prosecutors happen to know this person. Like, she probably hangs around the courthouse. And after the sidebar, Judge Kranick summarily dismissed her, told her she had to get out, and offered her a way to stream the trial if she wanted to, which she had absolutely no interest in doing. So I don't think, it's just a little nutty, but I don't think there was anything overly malicious, and definitely nothing having to do with Sarah Boone, the defense, or the prosecution. Josh Ritter, to you. I was here for the voir dire, jury selection, all of that. And they kept saying, look, you guys have to clear your calendars until November 1st. State said they wanted 2 weeks. The defense is going to take a week. Now it looks like this case could wrap in like a day or two. Why? Why are they so miscalculated with their projections?
I don't know. I think when they gave those projections, I remember thinking, what in the world are they going to fill up all that time with? Because we're not talking about a particularly complicated set of facts here. I mean, it was, she calls 911, police arrive, there's a dead man on the floor, They interview her a couple of times. When you start to think about, okay, how many witnesses am I going to need to call? You know, you've got responding officers, you've got interviewing officers, you've got the medical examiner, you've got the, and perhaps add some time in there for the defense case to put on their own client. I still don't see how that gets us to November. So I don't think that they're moving. I think they're moving with alacrity. I don't think they're moving at breakneck speed. I think they're kind of getting through this as one might imagine. I don't know. You're there in court. Does it seem like the judge is just pushing the gas on this whole thing? It seems to me like it's just playing out naturally, and they just happen to be getting through it quickly.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I just think that the state realizes that all they really need is the video evidence and the police interview. And by the way, they played the now infamous suitcase video, but the jurors looked more engaged this afternoon when they played the entire 2 sets of police interviews. One from inside the marked car with Detective Copsel, who was on the stand this afternoon, and then the entire interview from the Orange County Sheriff's Office, which was conducted 2 days after Jorge Torres was found deceased. So they were riveted by it. These jurors look really serious, like they're all invested in it. There's not a during the Adelson trial, there was some weird facial gestures. None of that. All these people are like serious, focused. And Josh, one interesting thing, one of the jurors, it's a 6-panel jury with 8 alternates, but one of the jurors during voir dire revealed that she herself is a domestic violence victim, and she's going to be testifying in her ex-husband's upcoming criminal trial. And that act was perpetrated on her. I thought that was a gift to the defense, but other lawyers have said if she views this as not a true victim of domestic abuse or DV, that she would side with the state. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, that's it. That's a really insightful way of looking at it. It is true that sometimes it can cut both ways, that they may be a true victim of domestic violence, may be offended by what Sarah Boone says. If it doesn't seem to ring true, if it does seem as though, think about it. If she's trying to exploit a very real trauma that this person may have experienced, that could absolutely backfire on her. But I don't think it's entirely, I don't think your thinking on it is entirely out of bounds either, that a person who's gone through that may sympathize, and also, to the defense's benefit, may understand, because a big question people have is, well, if you were suffering all this abuse, why didn't you just leave? Or why didn't you just call the police? Or why didn't you do A, B, or C, or D? A person who's actually experienced that might understand kind of the feelings of hopelessness that a person would experience, feelings like they can't get help, that they can't leave, whatever it is, feelings of codependency and everything else. So you could see where that could have a benefit for the defense. But I think in this case, it's probably the opposite is true, that if they just feel like this woman is trying to take advantage and exploit something that is a very real problem that a lot of people deal with, it might backfire on her.
Andre brings up a good point here. Has anyone seen his fingers? So Sarah Boone, of course, in the police interview today, which they again played fully, she tells the story that she left the suitcase open a little bit for a couple of fingers, thinking that he could get out. Josh, we had no definitive proof of this. As you know, they plan to bring forward this battered spouse defense, which, by the way, has not been signed off by the judge yet. Judge Kranik has not signed off on allowing that in yet. So we're going to see how that plays out. But we have to just go on her word, and her word is not a lot. In the video, you certainly don't see these few fingers peering out. And then we heard she whacked him with a baseball bat. But Josh, and we had the medical examiner today, which we'll get to in a few moments. What do we do with that information, Josh? Because she's the one telling us that. I don't think there's any video evidence that she left space for him. And even if he did, how the hell are you supposed to, while you're passing out, figure out how to get yourself out of a suitcase?
Yeah, I mean, I don't imagine that there would be any evidence of it, because my understanding is when everyone arrives, the first to arrive on scene was her ex-husband, right? And when he arrives, he's already out of the suitcase. So no one other than her would have witnessed this, gap in the zipper where he may have been able to get his hand out. So it's going to be interesting to see how she actually testifies to that. Because to me, I don't know exactly. I feel like they may have been so dead set on having this theory of self-defense and this idea that they needed some sort of overt act, something for him to be doing for her, to cause her to respond in a way that she needed to defend herself, that they're almost losing, sight of the forest for the trees, because the idea of this man having the opportunity to perhaps free himself and she's preventing him from doing that sounds so much worse to me than if it were the other way around. If it was just her leaving him in there and she goes and passes out in bed from drinking too much. But the idea that she actually prevented him from perhaps saving himself almost pushes this into the realm of first-degree murder, in my view.
That's an interesting point. Some people are questioning why it's not. And people are also questioning why she got a plea deal in the first place. She did herself in with the video she took. I don't believe she would ever go for a plea deal. Josh, I really enjoy your YouTube channel. There you go. I have no idea why she videotaped this. This hasn't been disclosed. It's the $64,000 question. If you're going to stuff someone in a suitcase and suffocate them to death, why on earth would you videotape it? But she was extraordinarily drunk, and you could tell on the video that she was drunk. So you're not always using your best judgment, but we're going to circle back to that. There's a little drama once again. Does Sarah appear to be acting appropriate to jurors? Or do you feel she's off-putting? She was very composed today, like almost like she was medicated, which is what people always say when a defendant is acting, calm and quiet. She was reprimanded earlier in the day, or maybe it was Friday. I'm already losing track of time, for looking back, because her jury selection consultant / paralegal person, and Tony Henderson, who's the second chair, his daughter is an attorney. She's also on the team, and they had to sit in the front row of the gallery. So she kept doing this. And a deputy, from what I understand, was the one who actually came over and told Sarah Boone, you can't keep looking back at the gallery. So I caught her looking back a couple times, but it wasn't to the degree that she was doing it before she got scolded at. I think that the jurors are actually much more focused on the testimony than her. They obviously glance at her. She always comes in with the belt, the waist chain and the hands cuffed. So they don't see that, but we see that. But they check her out just when they first walk in, and then their gaze is usually on whoever is speaking. Thank you to Inform NZ. But there was a little drama. So, Josh, these defense attorneys picked up this case that's 4 years old and change. They picked it up 45 days ago, and so they've been dropping some motions on the state. And this guy, Will J., who's the prosecutor, he is he's just I've said this before, he's an interesting guy. He's an interesting character. Always has colorful socks. I was tweeting out the other day it was Halloween socks. Today it was Christmas socks. So he's already in the holiday spirit. But he got up today and said that the defense gave them a motion. It was filed at 5:08 today regarding a witness. This witness's name is Pearl Walker, who did not want to come into court, but agreed to do a Zoom interview. At that point, Will J. gets up right away and he says, I don't want to have a Zoom interview. The judge then said, we'll take this up later, but the conversation continued. And then the judge was explaining to James Owens that all parties must give consent, the witness, the defense, the state. And because of that, he right on the spot denied the motion. So whoever this Pearl Walker is, I'm not sure who she is. She's not going to be allowed to testify. Josh, what kind of blow is that? The defense also keeps saying, hey, we're trying to figure out how to fly our witnesses in, which is a bad sign because the state appears to be resting tomorrow. So what kind of blow is it to the defense that they're not going to allow this witness, and how aggravating is it to the prosecution that they're getting these requests almost daily, like at the end of court when they're just tired and want to go home?
Yeah, it's frustrating, and it's also unprofessional. I mean, listen, we've talked a lot about how this guy kind of flew in the 11th hour, and he gets this whole mess handed to him, and now he's trying to do the best that he can. Okay, he also volunteered for this. I'm talking about her attorney, Owens. And I'll tell you what, too, this is, yes, it's difficult to get ready for cases, but it's also, they've had a couple weeks. That's enough time. I mean, the idea that they're still finding witnesses, it's like they're still building the plane as they're in mid-flight, is a little ridiculous to me. So I understand the prosecution's frustration that they want some, mid-trial, now we found somebody, but they're only willing to testify by Zoom witness. And I agree with the prosecution. I wouldn't concede to that either. I mean, it's like, who is this person? Why are they coming in late? And if they do, I want them here in court so that I can actually see them and cross-examine them. It's also funny to me that we're even talking about Zoom witnesses. COVID really changed everything. That idea would have been laughed out of court, 5 years ago, the idea of anyone appearing that way. But I have a follow-up question for you, Joel, from what somebody asked earlier. I know that my understanding is she's been fairly engaged with what's been taking place. I'm curious, has anything made her note-taking or her engagement go spike? Has there been any kind of testimony or witnesses that you really thought, wow, she's interested in what's being said right now, or troubled by what's being said right now?
I mean, I would say all last week, she was just like at a feverish pace with everything. Joel from Space Coast on the West Coast. Did you slip Sarah a peanut butter cup during the outburst? I should have a Reese's peanut butter cup. No, today it was much less note taking. There was a point toward the end of the police interview at the Orange County Sheriff's Office, not the one conducted in the back of the unmarked car, but the one at the Orange County Sheriff's Office toward like the final 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, something triggered James Owens, that whatever was said, I don't know exactly what it was, but he started like firing through all the photos, exhibit photos. And actually, I don't know if they're exhibit photos or just photos he has in a file. And he was pulling out a photo of, so that the suitcase doesn't have a traditional handle. I guess it was broken. So they put together like a makeshift handle. And for some reason, he was pulling out photos of that and asking his private investigator to have them like blown up, and was giving the private investigator directions about that. So I'm not really sure. It seemed kind of obscure to me what a makeshift suitcase handle would have to do with anything, but that got him excited. Sarah's just been taking notes pretty much, extemporaneously throughout until this afternoon, I think. So the judge did also today, he formally sort of announced that Sarah Boone will be giving this narrative testimony. He said to expect it tomorrow between 10 a.m. and 10:30 in the morning to begin. And so we are going to obviously be streaming that live, and we will have someone on to provide real-time analysis. Josh Ritter, if he wants to do it, it's open. We'll talk to him afterwards. It's early for him now. Back to this prep, again, I took the elevator down with James Owens and Tony Henderson and the rest of the defense team, and they're headed over to visit Sarah at the jail at 9:30. More specifically, Josh, what are they like? How do they guide her through this? I mean, she's basically unhinged. The jurors saw that in the police interview. She cannot stop talking. There's no real time limit on this. I mean, the judge is not going to let her go for 17 days, but he's got to let her go for a while. How do you rein this in?
You don't. It is one of the most nerve-wracking things for a defense attorney, is to try to prepare their client because of how high stakes it is and how much rests upon it. And you can only do so much, and especially when you're dealing with a strong-willed character like Sarah Boone, I imagine she doesn't take well to coaching anyway. So she probably feels that she knows better than her attorneys. And I can only imagine how these coaching sessions are going, but in a traditional, more traditional setting, you're trying to remind them of kind of the finer points because there's things that you're concerned about as the attorney that may not be as crystal clear to others, which have to do with the elements of the crime, have to do with the elements of your defense. If you're talking about self-defense, you want to be talking about fear, the reasonableness of your fear, how you felt that you were acting reasonably in response to that fear, how your fear was aggravated by this cycle of abuse that you were experiencing. Perhaps they're even getting to the finer points about why did she not tell the police that? Why would she not be honest with the police? All of these there's a lot in this case that they're going to have to go over with her. But, eventually, you just kind of pray because there's no stopping it. There's no timeout once she gets going. And certainly once she's then subjected to cross-examination, there's no throwing a life raft. There's no, can we have a moment to speak with our client? They are up there until the prosecution is done with them, which I had a question about this. Did the judge actually make a ruling on this testifying in the narrative? Because I've heard this now a few times. Is that how he says that he intends to have her testify?
It was brought up, and I think he talked about it. And since that time, it hasn't really been brought up again. So now everyone's questioning, is it truly narrative testimony? But from everyone all accounts and everyone I've asked, including people who know the case much better, they are telling me it is in fact narrative testimony because of the fact that she changed her story so many times. So they can't risk, this better than I, but James Owens as for defense can't risk, perjuring himself or suborning perjury. So as far as I know, it's going to be narrative testimony. This is, by the way, someone asked, can they object? And I'm almost certain they can object nonstop, the state, if they want to. Is that right, Josh, during the narrative testimony?
Yeah, they can object for the same kinds of objections. If she starts to say something that's hearsay, they can object on hearsay. If she starts to ramble on about something that's irrelevant, they can object on relevance grounds. So there's most of the objections available to them. This idea of her testifying in the narrative, I have only seen it maybe once in my entire career. And then I know a lot of people talked about it because in the Robert Tellis case, that's the way that he testified. But it is incredibly rare because it's not even, many attorneys are putting their clients up there and they know that their clients have a theory of the case and they know that their theory might not be entirely founded in the world of reality. And there's no kind of concern about perjury, that you're representing your client, you're going to question your client, and here's your client's story of what took place. It's only in those incredibly rare instances where it's like, for a fact what your client is going to testify to is provably false, and therefore your client is going to be perjuring themselves on the stand, and that you feel ethically, by even asking them the questions that lead them through that, you are somehow taking part in that perjury. Then you ask for permission from the court to have them testify that way. But it's not like you have a choice, like, oh, we're going to choose to testify in the narrative, because that in and of itself is an objectionable way to testify. The prosecution could object on narrative. So this is what's so curious to me about all of this is I don't remember there being a hearing where that was all fleshed out, unless it took place without it being in front of, out in the open court or something. But if that is how she testifies, then that's usually what's taking place behind the scenes though you will never hear it. So maybe that's it. Maybe they had a chambers conference to discuss this because he didn't want to say in open court, my client's going to perjure herself.
Yeah, that's interesting. And maybe that is exactly what happened. That would make sense. So there's an interesting, there's a question here. How is she going to testify about the 11 minutes? So Josh, I think we talked about this last time, but the defense, there are two videos of the suitcase suffocation. One is 2 minutes and change, and then one is like 37 seconds. And the second one is the suitcase is now right side up from being wrong side up. And so in his opening statements, James Owens said the 11 minutes between when these two videos were played, he said, this is the key. This is going to be the key to the case. You're going to hear this from Sarah. Number one, obviously there's no video, so that's a good time to hang your hat on. If you had to guess, what are they going to say during these 11 minutes? What, that he stuck his fingers further out? I mean, there has to be a real overt act there.
Right.
What could it be?
It's that he said, you let me out of here, and or I'll kill you, or if I get out of here, I'm gonna bury you, or some, in my view, if they really wanted to promote this self-defense case, that is what would be the most optimal thing to have been taking place in those 11 unrecorded minutes, as you point out, is that he made some threat or something took place in there where she realized there was no way she could let this man out or he would take her life. And therefore, that's why she didn't let him out. She hit his hand with a baseball bat, whatever else took place next. And she knew that he meant it because of this cycle of abuse that she had been experiencing. I have to imagine something like that is what they're going to testify to, because him just, by the way, getting his fingers out and trying to unzip it, to me, that's not going to convince any jurors that that's a threat to her life.
I agree with you. They're going to say that in that 11 minutes that he was starting to make his way out. It was threatening her, that she feared for her life, and she ran upstairs and passed out. Why they're not just saying she was basically blackout drunk and it was an accident is just, I have no idea why they're not. Yeah. I mean, it's Occam's razor. Why not go with the simplest defense? Why create this? One thing, by the way, before we get to this question, someone pointed this out and I did see it right on the counsel table, right in front of James Owens, is this book. I think it's titled like literally Battered Spouse Syndrome, something along those lines. And it's in big, bold letters. Speak to that. Are defense attorneys, because that's the kind of thing, it was so big, the writing. I don't know that jurors could see it, but if they're walking in and they're standing and they peer over, they certainly like get a glimpse of it. Yeah. But yet battered spouse, the defense has not been allowed in yet by Judge Kranick. What's the deal with that? Can you have that book just laying there? It's kind of like subliminal messaging.
That might be him being clever. It might be accidental, but it sounds like the way it's positioned, it's him trying to be a little clever and maybe suggest something to the jurors. You would hope the prosecution would be a little more mindful as to what is on the table. You remind me of, I had a case when I was a prosecutor where I'm about to give my opening statements and I look over and the defendant has a Bible about as big as a brick sitting on the table in front of him. And I'm like, Your Honor, I am sorry, but this is a bit much for me. I don't have any problem with people's religion, but this is obviously signaling something to the jury here that this is his chosen reading material before we go into this case. And the judge told him to put it away. So maybe no one has noticed it and he's been clever enough to point it that way. But yeah, the judge, my understanding is the ruling that was made was that they're going to have to lay the foundation. And the only way they lay that foundation is if she testifies. So, and by the way, for your listeners, I don't think it needs to be much. I think if she gets up there and says, he was abusive to me, the police have been called out, they have police reports to corroborate that, and says that because of that, I was in this ongoing level of fear and apprehension of what he might do next. To me, that's enough for the judge, and he'll let them have the expert testify to what that all means and how the jurors should receive that.
Good point. Well taken. The problem with that, we'll get to this also, is while the police interview is going on and the jurors were absolutely riveted by it. Again, I think I mentioned this. I wasn't in court for the actual suitcase video. I was driving up, but I was there for the police interview, and they play it for her. And she says, I can't watch this. I can't take it. When they were doing that, the jury was absolutely riveted by all of that. So I think they're very serious in terms of how they're taking this case. Owen said he wanted to be with Sarah during the suitcase part. What was that about? Can she testify in narrative but have Owens with her during part of her testimony? He also wants the suitcase removed from the courtroom. It had been on this kind of a dolly to carry papers around. Today, the bailiff, actually it was the state, it was Will J. He put the suitcase box on the ground. I mean, again, another sort of lingering subliminal message. But I'll tell you, Josh Ritter.
Messages, yeah. It's like having the bloody knife sitting on your desk while you're.
This suitcase, by the way, is so much smaller in person. It is insane. Also, we learned, that with, I think, the medical examiner, that Jorge Torres, 5'1", 103 pounds, and I believe Sarah Boone outweighed him by 30 pounds. But in the openings, James Owens said they're the same size, but he's physically much stronger. And in a fight, he would win 10 out of 10 times. So it's interesting because she's got a bunch of pounds on him.
Yeah, when they described,
am I back, Josh?
You're back. You were cutting out a little bit, but when I heard the dimensions of that suitcase described, I was shocked. I was thinking like a normal kind of carry-on size, but it sounds to me like it's even smaller than that.
I think it's 28 inches wide. I'm not 100%. I mean, 28 inches long. How a human being could fit in there. I have absolutely no idea. Someone's saying, Sarah Boone weighed 140 pounds at the time of her arrest. I apologize if there's some Wi-Fi issues. I'm going to get it fixed. Marriott has an 800 number for Wi-Fi. So I'll do my best to get it fixed. Court started late today because jurors were stuck in lines. I've never seen lines like this to get into a courthouse. It's like TSA on the day before Thanksgiving. They wrap around like crazy. So that was going on. She came into court today wearing a black suit and a black and white blouse. It's interesting. The judge always puts what she's wearing on the record just so they could say that she was in fact in the courtroom. Josh, the forensic pathologist is a woman named Dr. Sarah Zadovich. Really impressive credentials, went to the University of Wisconsin, medical school, the whole thing. She said that the cause of death was positional asphyxiation. The manner is homicide. And this got really interesting in a weird way. There was a lot of talk about, so what does this mean? The state said, basically define asphyxia. And she said that's like saying I drive a car. It's a very broad generalization, asphyxia. So she narrowed it down. She said there's strangulation, there's drowning, there's mechanical asphyxia, like if something falls on you. So she was kind of breaking down. I was a little somber and macabre. And she was asked what the most common form of asphyxiation is. And for those who are sick and interested, it is ligature asphyxiation. We always hear the serial killers using these ligatures. But then they got into how do you approximate the time of Jorge Torres' actual death? And she said it was really, really tough to do. They talked about the level of oxygen that will ultimately end your life, and it's 8% oxygen or less. So this was all really interesting just to listen to. And he also suffered this blunt force trauma. Now, STS, help me out because I don't recall myself exactly how we got to the baseball bat. But Josh, obviously they were trying to make the point that he had all this blunt force trauma. He had impact to the left side of his head. They also talked about his blood alcohol level. They were showing the autopsy photos, which I'm very happy I wasn't there for. Also, he had this discoloration on his elbow, and the ME said that was because the suitcase was compressed so hard onto his elbow. So just really a gruesome way to visualize what happened to this guy. But Josh, what about the blunt force trauma? How do you think that plays into? Thank you, Emily D. Baker, for giving STS a shout out. That's very cool. I had no idea. Josh Ritter, what about this blunt force trauma? The jurors are hearing about this. This guy's stuffed in a suitcase, but now they're hearing that I guess she reportedly smacked him with a baseball bat.
I think it just adds to the cruelty of the moment. I mean, this case, when you really begin to think about it, this is going to give me nightmares as far as the awful ways to die. This man's death was not quick and it was not painless. It was horrible and it was torture, and it lasted minutes, if not hours. You know, we see in that video, we don't know how long he's been trapped in there by the time she's taking the video, but we see in that video that he's able to yell, he's able to, call her name. So he's getting some breath in his lungs. But the idea is that he was in a position where each breath he took was a little less than the last breath he took. So he is slowly, breath by breath, suffocating himself to death inside of that thing. And I imagine as he begins to panic and he begins to squirm, that hastens the whole thing and gets worse and worse and worse. So this, if you really try to picture, and this was one of the kind of criticisms I had of the prosecution opening, is that is an amazingly awful picture to paint for the jurors, that I feel like he missed an opportunity to do that. But think about that moment. And what is she doing while all of that is taking place? She's videotaping him. She's mocking him. She's laughing at him. And now we know she may have been beating him with a bat and tossing the suitcase back and forth because it was in one position at one point and in another position in the other video. So while this man is going through this torturous death on his own, she's adding to that torture by tormenting him physically and emotionally and with her own words. It's just beyond awful when you begin to really spell it out that way.
Yeah, and the sick irony of what you were just talking about. I heard the medical examiner, the forensic pathologist, explaining this today, that the more he was begging for his life, the more oxygen he was losing.
Oh my God.
And
Just
more carbon dioxide was coming out of him. So it's like you're begging, and that's literally also what's killing you at the same time.
Yeah.
Judy girl here says 28 inches in length. My legs are 36 inches from hip to ankle. This guy may have been somewhat of a contortionist. He had to be very flexible. He's definitely not like a professional contortionist, but he's little, and I just don't know how in the world I don't think I could get my 5-year-old son in there.
No.
Which is kind of crazy. So the fourth witness today there was also a digital forensic expert who testified. By the way, Josh, with her, the defense crossed her and said, well, Sarah Boone willingly gave you the passcode. It seemed to fall really flat. It's the only thing they could ask. What do you do when you've kind of got nothing to go with? And are you better off just not asking the question?
Yeah, sometimes asking no questions is better than asking a couple of really weak questions. Sometimes you can even think about it as sending the message of, I'm so unconcerned by what was just testified to that I don't even need to ask any questions. But certainly limping in there with a question that falls flat like that isn't going to get you anywhere. You don't score points in numbers of questions.
By the way, a lot of people are maybe hypothesizing that Sarah hit him with a bat before helping him in the suitcase. Ida Shaw, JD, this is a great point. Hasn't Owens already sunk his client by saying she lied to the detectives? He openly admitted that. How are they going to believe her now? I think this is a big reason why she's testifying in the narrative, but it was said to the jurors. Jurors have to think she's, a bit of a compulsive liar. How do you get around that?
Yeah, that was a point that shocked me too during opening statements. He said that. He's like, my client lied to police. And I just felt that just made me cringe when he said it, because, now you've used that term lied. You can't unring that bell now that you are, you've labeled your client a liar before she's even taken the stand. Obviously they have to address it. Obviously they have to somehow answer why she gave certain answers to police, why she admitted things that are now so important to her, being that she was in fear for her life, all of that kind of stuff. But I think there's a better way of doing it. You could have said, listen, you're going to hear about the statements that she gave to police, and you're going to understand what her mental state was at the time she was giving those statements and what she was really concerned with at the time she was giving those statements. But when you start to use the L word and you're talking about a client who's about to testify, it's obviously, problematic.
Yeah. Dog Mom here. Do you think that James Owens, the lead defense attorney for Sarah Boone, believed all of her lies, and that is why he went forward with this, because he seems so unprepared, even with the defense they're going with? Listen, I think he's doing an admirable job with what he has, and the fact that he wanted to defend this woman when no one else did. And I think he's a pretty smart guy. He does have a very folksy way of sort of delivering his statements to the jurors. But Josh, you think he was that gullible to believe everything she was telling him?
I don't think she was believing it. I think he knew that if he actually wanted to get the case, that he's going to have to go with that. This is the same woman who went through 8 previous attorneys before him. And I think that was the marching orders, that this is the defense. This is what I want argued. If you're willing to sign off onto that, then you can have this wonderful case and make all these millions in glory from defending me. But if you don't, then hit the highway. And I don't think he's convinced of this case at all. I think he knew that's what he had to go in here to argue.
By the way, one thing that really stood out to me, which I have in my notes, but they're further down, but I want to bring it up now so I don't forget it. About 2 hours into the police interview, Josh, I was sitting within 2 feet of James Owens, right in the front row gallery, right behind them at that point. And he just stopped and turned to Tony Henderson and said, "Are we really still here?" And he just started kind of laughing to Tony Henderson. I thought it was really inappropriate. I can't imagine there's no way the jurors really heard him, I don't think, unless they're reading his lips. But if they glanced over and he's sitting there cracking up for a brief moment during this police interview, I don't think that really reflects well on his client. What do you think?
No, I think that is one thing you have to be completely cognizant of at all times when you're a lawyer, is that those jurors, if they're not watching the person testifying, then they're watching you and they're watching your client, and people do observe things and they're taking note, and they're if they see that you're laughing at a time that they feel that it's inappropriate, they're going to remember that. That may not be quote unquote evidence, but as far as they're concerned, it could be just as convincing sometimes.
I've said this a million times. They always say in TV news, the smallest mistakes, a misspelling of the president's name on the screen, no one's listening to what the president says.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's the smallest things that will distract a jury. And this could be it. Dog Mom is back here. This is a great point. In my opinion, and I'd like to know if the both of you agree, the jury does not like to see someone without any remorse at all. I've noticed that in my own dealings when I'm in the courtroom. She has zero remorse, Josh, and we're about to get into the most interesting testimony was Detective Chelsea Copsell. Not only did she have no remorse, she just belabored the point that it was unintentional when it was clearly intentional. So how does that reflect on her in terms of what the jury is saying, that she doesn't even, to 911, to the detectives, never does she really say, "Oh, how is George? What happened to him? I'm sorry. How did this happen? I feel horrible that I did." None of those words come out of her mouth at any time.
It's hugely impactful. You know, a large part of judging someone's culpability is going to come down to how much do you empathize with or understand what they were going through in that moment. And I don't think anything about the way she's responding was relatable. She seemed like she was in shock. I will grant her that, when, at least in the initial first responders video, she seems like she's in shock, but it also seems like this kind of self-preservation of making everyone know this was an accident. We were just playing a game. But you're right. At no point do you ever see her kind of overcome with grief that this person she apparently had a relationship with for a couple of years and, may have loved, is now dead and died in a horribly, horribly tragic way. It just, none of it appears to be something that I think any of the jurors will be able to empathize with, but they're going to view it as kind of sociopathic behavior.
By the way, Josh, now that the neither here nor there, now that the Taylor Swift Eras tour is over, am I allowed to take my friendship bracelets off, or will I be vilified by my daughters? What do you think?
No, I think those are permanent now. That's your life now. You cannot take those off.
They're like tattoos. Quick programming note. So once again, Sarah Boone is expected to testify sometime between 10 and 10:30. That means beginning to testify. I might be talking to Josh in November about how the testimony is going, but I hope not. But tomorrow will be a big day with Sarah Boone taking the stand. Tomorrow we will be doing a wrap-up show, like we are right now, right after court, not later. And then at 7:00 tomorrow night, we're actually going to revisit the Adelson mess that it is. The state has now today responded to the appellate attorney's filing where he asked for an evidentiary hearing. The state, in so many words, said it is frivolous to be asking for that. Doesn't matter. This guy's guilty. He was convicted by a jury of his peers. So we're going to break that down. Stephen Webster. Doubleheader after court all day. Yes. And by the way, there will also be a lunch live tomorrow that you don't want to miss, because I am going to be glued to Sarah Boone tomorrow, and I will break down everything that I see during the lunch live. So again, tomorrow morning in the AM, we've got Sarah Boone on the stand here. Lunch live with me, PM. She's probably still going to be going on, or we'll be getting crossed at that point. Right after court, we're back for a wrap-up show, and then 7:00 we are Adelsoning again. So there you go for tomorrow. Josh, this is an interesting question here, and then I've got some things I've got to get through, but what kind of prompting can Owen say to Sarah during her narrative? Like, is he going to get up and help her remember, like, her train of thought? Like, what if she loses her train of thought?
I mean, that's the thing, is if they're testifying in the narrative, that's just supposed to be them up there telling their story. The only way I could see that changing is if they start to go off on a, complete side quest, and the judge starts sustaining objections to, relevance. Maybe he gets up and redirects her. Sarah, can you get back to the day of what happened next? You said you found him in the suitcase. Then what happened? Kind of a deal. But that's kind of the whole point, is that she's flying solo, and it's kind of up to her to get through the whole thing. And if she misses a crucial point, or she misses making a crucial, establishing a crucial element of their defense, that's it. That's on her.
Yeah. For Melissa, what can Sarah say that the jury hasn't heard in the interrogation? I mean, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we're going to hear tomorrow from Sarah Boone is exactly the opposite of what she told police, which is going to be a big problem for her, which is everything's fine. We've been great for a month. She's going to say he was incredibly abusive, that he would fly off the handle, that he hit me. She's going to say something much more recently. I was scared for my life, and I simply, I usually flee to my ex-husband's house, or I go upstairs to bed. I was scared for my life, so I fled to my bed. Is that going to be roughly what she says?
It's going to have to be. If she wants any chance at establishing a self-defense here, she's going to have to be. And I think, you're right to point out it's going to be whatever took place in those 11 minutes in between the two videos. She's going to have to say something that explains to jurors why she left this man to die inside that suitcase. I think she's also going to have to explain too, did she actually fall asleep? Did she actually go upstairs and just let this all play out? How does that work into her being in all of this fear? So yeah, she's got a lot to answer to, but I agree with you. I think she's going to abandon her statement to law enforcement and say, all of that was nonsense. I wasn't quite clear as to what they were trying to do. And I was scared to death that they were going to try to hold me responsible for this. So that's why I told them what I said, but that's not the truth. Here's the truth.
And by the way, in the police interview, it's a very subtle thing, but I picked up on it today. She said, when I went upstairs, thank you so much, Debbie. By the way, if you're enjoying the content, appreciate the content. Someone's told me not to say enjoy, which is probably good advice. But if you appreciate the content, please hit subscribe. Please hit the like button. We also have a Patreon link. The support helps create great content. So thank you so much. There was something very subtle, Josh. She tells the police, I went upstairs and I just went straight to bed. I didn't even turn the TV on. So what I'm thinking is, like, she was really fearing for her life, right? Why would she even be giving a single thought to whether she wanted to watch TV or not? Like, if you're fearing for your life, you're just going up and hiding. You're not sitting there thinking like, hey, there's a great new show on Netflix. I'm not going to watch it. So there's these so many inconsistencies like that I would imagine the jury is also noticing. I mean, and that's just going to be her death knell, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's, the more you think about it, that's a big question too. Why did going upstairs solve her problem? If she's in such fear of this man, how does going upstairs solve any of that? I could understand if I ran to a friend's house. Okay. But it's like, she's going to have to explain how the nightmare that she was living ended just because she went upstairs. And then she apparently felt safe enough upstairs that she then fell asleep. So we might be hearing an entirely different story for the first time ever when she testifies, because I think she's just going to have to abandon everything she said before now.
I absolutely agree. We're going to hear something completely contrary to what she has to say that. There's no other way. And she's probably going to be perjuring herself, but she's already done that, I guess, in the police interviews, because, she said, I'm not drunk, and then says we were drunk. She says we were getting along great, then we're not getting along great because I was fearful of him. On and on, the contradictions go. Who can sleep when somebody wants to kill you is alive in a suitcase? Jimmy McNutty, great point. Trial watcher since the OJ days, which I say on purpose because people, they get mad at me when I constantly repeat things, but I like to say that. Yeah, Josh, what about that little simple point? And I wonder if the state is writing all this down. She just went up and went to bed because she was fearing for her life. It makes zero sense.
No, none of it makes any sense. The built-in defense is what you pointed out, that she was too drunk. She was too drunk to really realize what was taking place, the gravity and the seriousness of the moment. And she was so drunk that she thought, you know what, I'm just going to lay down for a moment and I'm a little sleepy. And before she knew it, it was the next day. And oh my God, he's dead. But this whole...
Which, by the way, I think that might be the truth. And I might get hate mail for this. I think she's totally whacked out of her mind. She's not doesn't think the way we think. I don't know that she was looking to murder him that night. I just think she has all this pent up rage towards him. And she was absolutely drunk, really, really drunk, and did something incredibly stupid. So again, I just do not know why they wouldn't go with that defense, like the blacked out defense. And by the way, someone said she used the phrase with police, when I came to, which is a great point, because only someone who like blacks out drunk would say something along those lines. Otherwise, you'd say when I wake up. She's a straight A student. She excels at everything. She did say that. I think that people don't like, I was just yelling at my kids yesterday or 2 days ago to be humble and have humility. No one wants someone bragging about how great they are, which is exactly what she was doing. So let's go. I'm going to just kind of go through this police interview and the testimony from this afternoon. Obviously, they played both police interviews, the one in the unmarked car and the other one. They bring Detective Chelsea Copsell up to the stand. She looked like she wanted no part in being there. Someone remind Joel, she did call Brian, yes, at 11:46 p.m. Correct. She did do that. And then she calls him the next morning. So Detective Chelsea Copsell was witness 14 overall, the fourth witness of the day. So they've gone through 14 witnesses between Friday and today. She talks about how this all happened at the Orange County Sheriff's Office back in 2020, that she responded to the scene after she was flagged by Deputy Rodriguez. She said the deputy fills her in. And then they start to play this first part of the interview. She is then telling them, look, we had a bottle of wine, we painted, we did puzzles. They follow up with what type of wine. She says Chardonnay. You can go see it. It's in the trash. Approximately what time was this? It was 4 o'clock. Oh, we had another bottle. We may have drank that bottle. No reaction from Sarah Boone during all of this. The jurors are absolutely glued to her at this point when she starts saying, we were puzzled out. We were painted out. It sounds silly, but we decided to play hide and seek. And right after that, Josh, she says, we were, and I quote here, having fun and enjoying each other's company. Having fun and enjoying each other's company. In order for battered spouse to work, there's got to be an overt act, an imminent threat. How does she, I mean, she has to lie. Yeah. How does she get around it?
She doesn't. And that's why she's going to have to abandon that statement and say that is not true. I agree with you. I think that this initial statement, if she's to be believed at all, she was trying to distance herself from any deliberate act that she made that evening. She's trying to say, oh my God, this is an accident. We were having fun. No, I wasn't mad at him at all, because I think in her head at that moment, she's thinking, if I let them know that we had been fighting, or if I let them know that I was afraid of him or any of that stuff, they're going to think I did this on purpose. And so I think in her panicked brain at that time she's doing these interviews, she's thinking the best way to save herself is to make it sound like everything was hunky-dory and this was a horrible, horrible accident. Now she's decided that she has to pursue this self-defense theory. And so she's going to have to say that, no, none of that was true. In fact, I was afraid for my life. I have been afraid for my life for several months. At any moment, I felt like this man could take my life. And this was the one opportunity I had where I had control finally once and forever. And I wasn't going to let him out of there so that he could actually kill me. I think that's, she's, something along those lines is what she's going to have to explain. But you're correct in saying it works adverse to everything she's ever said before that.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating because she is an unusual personality. I wouldn't know how to diagnose her. I'm not a psychologist, but she is very enamored with herself, and she's going to really enjoy hearing herself speak. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. Joel, did you notice how Henderson, this is the second chair for the defense, Tony Henderson, was a little taken back by the video? Some of the views I watch on different streams show that he seemed, how dare you watch a different stream, dog mom? How dare you? Seemed a little shocked. When the police interview was playing, and now I'm talking about the long one at the sheriff's office, the 2-hour plus one, you could hear a pin drop in there, except for the time that James Owens turned to Tony Henderson and said, are we still watching this? And kind of chuckled. It was fascinating to watch. The prosecutors were just looking at the video. It's on a screen, obviously, at the front of the courtroom. The detectives just watching the video. The jurors started to kind of lean forward. One had their chin on their hand like this. Some of the jurors were taking notes, but most of the jurors were just watching. And the defense, who I thought would be taking a lot of notes, weren't taking any? I don't know. It's an interesting question, and I don't know if they just almost were like surrendering Josh during that time. Joel looked very Miami Vice on the. Thanks, Al Schmidt. I'm not sure what we're referencing there, but I appreciate that. Super Planner. I do live in Miami. Josh, do you think there's any way at all she walks on this? To me, it seems so obvious that she can't. But I'd love your thoughts on that. I don't think there's any way 6 jurors are going to find her not guilty. However, Josh, only takes one. They say it's harder, with 12 than 6. But what do you think?
I agree with you. I think I think the evidence is, first of all, super compelling. We're not dealing with a whodunit. Everybody knows who did it. Everybody knows how it took place. Everybody knows how awful it is. Add to that, she's not particularly sympathetic. It's a high emotional and factual case for the prosecution. Being said, whenever I get asked a question like that, stranger things have happened, man. You put your life in the hands of 6 people or 12 people, and stranger things can happen. And, it, like you said, it takes one to hang it. And, I've seen incredibly strong cases where somebody walks out the door. So, I don't think it'll go that way. I would be completely floored, but you never know.
Hey, it is Florida. You never know here in Florida. By the way, I'm going to get to the heart attack. That was fascinating. I'll tell you what I'm talking about in a minute. But can Sarah have notes or a list of points to guide her? What about that, Josh?
So the rule is that you are not allowed to be referring to notes. You are allowed to look at things to refresh your memory. So it may be a situation where she has some notes and ask the judge if she can take a look to refresh her memory as to what else she wanted to mention. Also highly unlikely, but the rule is also whatever you look at, the prosecution is entitled to have a copy of. So if she brings anything up there and intends to use it to refresh her memory, she has to hand over a copy of that to the prosecution. My guess is she will just get up there and tell everything, from the heart. But again, this is why I'm so confused that she's doing this in the narrative form, if that is what's already been discussed. But maybe that's exactly how it's all going to play out. In which case, I think, now's time to take your bets on how long it'll last, because this is a person who likes the limelight. This is a person who likes attention. So you could be in for a marathon of a direct testimony.
Yeah, I didn't really follow the Telus case, although I found it fascinating. I just didn't have the time. I don't know how long. Do you know how long he spoke for, Josh?
He spoke for, I know it was hours, but then it carried on even longer. It was over the course of several days, because then he would do cross-examination and then do his own redirect, which was also in the narrative form. So then he would talk forever, responding to some of the questions that he had been asked on cross. So it was a marathon. It lasted several days altogether between direct and cross.
I think this is going to go a while. And then I think Will J, he's a very, very, as peculiar as he is and kind of eccentric, he's been in that office, I think he said, since 97. So he's a career prosecutor. That's a tough job, Josh, by the way, just being a career prosecutor, just one. He's also, from what I've heard, he's going to be prosecuting the Matty Soto case with Stefan Stearns. Who knows?
This same prosecutor?
I believe so. I believe that's what I've heard. Yeah. I haven't confirmed that, but that's what a few people have told me. But Josh, just kind of off on a little tangent, being a career prosecutor, it's kind of like a thankless job, because you're doing a public service. You're not getting paid a ton of money, and you have to work your behind off to get your cases together. And, I'm sure he's getting paid for 40 hours a week and working way more than that. Is it a thankless job, Josh?
It is, but it's also an incredibly gratifying job. I mean, I thought I was going to be a career prosecutor, quite frankly. I mean, I got into that job and I thought this is where I'm going to be until I retire. Things changed, life changed. My feelings about the office changed a little bit, so I left. But a lot of people, you know, they are very, yeah, you don't get paid. You kind of have crappy suits for the rest of your life, and but you feel very good about what you're doing because you're putting the bad guys away, and that's a incredibly satisfying occupation. But it's funny, you used to see a lot of people who would go into a prosecutor's office for 2 years because they wanted to kind of get their chops in trial work, and then they would go on to some cush gig somewhere at some big, white shoe law firm or something. But you see a lot of people now who are just making a life career out of it.
Yeah, I've been to criminal defense attorney Tim Jansen's home in Tallahassee, and without having ever seen Will J's home, I can guarantee you it doesn't look anything like Tim Jansen's house. So criminal defense, I guess it can pay. 1776 daughter. Joel, is it true that a jury consultant is seated behind Sarah? Yes. She's a blonde woman. I'm blanking on her name at the moment. Is Sarah Boone waiting to hear the consultant's opinion of the jury after her testimony to decide on the plea? I don't know if she's going to have that choice. I mean, Josh said it earlier on. He thinks that's off the table. It was offered to her before the trial. What's your take on this, Josh?
I don't know why that jury consultant could have just been hired on to kind of continue to those people aren't cheap, by the way. So the fact that they got somebody who's just a jury consultant kind of sitting back there and
I think they're all, by the way, I think they're all working pro bono. That's what I've heard.
Well, maybe could be. Usually the rare instances where I've had jury consultants involved, we used them for the jury and then they're gone, and their value to just kind of, the jury's liking this or not liking this is not as valuable as you might think it is. But to your point about is anything going to happen where they're going to feel like, okay, this is going downhill for us, let's go ahead and take that offer? That's not usually the way it works. It's usually, I mean, that offer was a gift, by the way. Manslaughter for 15 years is an absolute gift that they were giving to her. I cannot see them saying like, yeah, you can still take that after you made us go through all the trouble of putting on a trial, and we know how this trial is going.
Well, there's some interesting banter going back and forth, having nothing to do with this, but it caught my attention. Tanya Jones, COE, same. I know my 17-digit debit card number plus CVV code. I remember phone numbers from childhood, but I cannot remember dinner. The COE responding here. I can see a 8 to 16-digit number once, remember it forever. Usually a useless skill, but comes in handy every now and then when she's getting a credit card. I can attest to the fact that this is true. This COE has like a photographic memory, very high IQ, very smart. She remembers dinner, but she can't remember to hang the towel properly in the bathroom. So you're now involved in marital issues. Here we go. Send the hate mail. How dare you? She takes care of the kids and does the show. Just hang the towel up, COE. It's not that hard to do. So here we go. Ritter, this thing, and then we'll start to slowly wrap because I'm delirious. I'm not going to whine to everybody about I had a very busy weekend and went to bed late, was woken up by my kids late, got up super early, drove to Orlando. We all have a tough life. So Carm right now is screaming. Shawnetta, thanks. I sat near Joel both days. Shawnetta, you have to introduce yourself. I didn't even know this. And there's not a lot of people in there. So Shawnetta, come by tomorrow, please, and say hello. So Josh, this was interesting. During this interview with the police, with the sheriff's deputies, I should say, the detectives, she said, Sarah goes, I thought of the suitcase. Wow, that's an amazing revelation, right? She's like, I thought about the suitcase because she's like, I was looking for him everywhere. And then it occurred to me, the suitcase. So she goes, I opened it. I took him out. I stretched him out. I could tell something was wrong. I mean, he's reported to be purple, so that's probably a good indication. She says, I heard a gurgle, which I'm not sure what that is because he was obviously not with us anymore. And then she says something really interesting, and I'll tell you why. She says he had been complaining that his chest hurt. I might be wrong, but when the defense watched this interview, I think they really picked up on that line. Had been complaining that his chest hurt. Because now I'm scrolling up to my forensic pathologist notes, and one of the things that the defense raised on cross of the forensic pathologist had to do with Jorge Torres's heart. James Owens did the cross. He said, first, let's discuss the toxicology. He asked about how many autopsies she's done, which is 3,000. She's been there 12 years. George had a 0.138 blood alcohol level. He says to her, you're aware he stepped into the suitcase on his own. She says, I don't know. We're just going off of what Sarah Boone is saying. He's asking if you could give an accurate time of death. She couldn't. She talked about when she arrived on scene, about how environmental suffocation can kill you, about fine motor skills can be affected, which is maybe why he couldn't use his fingers in all of this. But then he finally gets to a medical diagnosis, Josh, of arteriosclerosis, which is like hardening of the arteries, and implied that he died of a heart attack in there. He had what's known as a widowmaker, which is where your arteries are, one artery is blocked like over a 90% blockage, and it can kill you. It was interesting, but I think that it was really grasping at straws. My question to you is, if you're going to go with a battered spouse defense, now why are you bringing in a possible heart attack? Because now it's just confusing, and it's not sowing doubt, it's sowing confusion.
Yeah. No, 100%. As you were describing all of that, I'm thinking to myself, well, that sounds actually like a clever defense that is also not self-defense, and also probably more straightforward than the defense they've decided to go with. Yeah, I mean, causation is always a element in a crime, and so you have to show that her actions caused his death, and if he is somehow has some proclivity to die in a situation that might not present danger of death to other people, yeah, that's something you could certainly argue that, hey, on top of all of this, anybody else in his position wouldn't have died, ladies and gentlemen. And so therefore she thought everything was going to be okay. And it was only because he's got this, rare and tragic condition that he lost his life. But you're right. When you're just kind of throwing that against the wall, when the main thrust of your defense is self-defense, it's just going to confuse jurors. Now, usually confusion is where the defense wants to live, right? If the jurors end up confused, well, then fantastic, because they're not going to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. But in this case, you do need them to be at least clear on the defense you're putting forward. In other words, if they're not clear that you're saying self-defense or accident or heart attack, they're not going to buy any of your defenses, and your defenses are not going to help you out at all. So I agree with you. I feel like there was so much more that may have been convincing built into this case than what they're actually going with.
Yeah, and listen, I like to give James Owens a benefit of the doubt and his whole team because they picked it up 45 days ago, but sometimes I find myself sort of scratching my head. And in interesting contrast, Will J. and this guy, Dave Cacciatore, who's the other prosecutor, they're just they're very methodical, quick, not a lot of talking, not a lot of questions. And look, they've been doing it a long time. At least Will J has. So I think he understands the game. Judy Girl here. This is interesting. I've been a cardiac surgical nurse since 1992 to 2020. A 75% occlusion of a coronary artery is not bad and usually medically treated. No stent, no bypass. Widowmaker just makes it dramatic. That is, I believe you 1,000%, and I'm sure it is. Confusion equals reasonable doubt, but not when you're confusing, Abby, your own defense. That's what I think. Like he's like kind of putting out weird, conflicting signals and messages and narratives, but maybe, I don't know. You're smarter than me, Abby Crossing. How do you rate these attorneys, Josh? So unmagnetic. They're kind of prosecutors, Josh, in general, not you, of course, can be a little drip dry, right? Because they're just giving you facts. That's definitely the case with Will J here.
Yeah, I mean, prosecutors for the most part are kind of, here's the facts. I'm going to be very straightforward. I want to be trustworthy. I mean, to an extent, you want them to be like that because they certainly don't want to come across as too slick and polished and trying to sell the jurors on a bill of goods. But I do find that he's especially dry. He does seem, he's doing a very admirable job, and they're presenting the evidence, and that's really the job at the end of the day. But it does, especially in his opening, I know that he kind of got derailed a little bit, that he couldn't use the audio visual aids that he wanted to, but it did seem to kind of even lose me at a point.
Yeah, someone else, by the way, told me Jodi Arias went over a week in testimony. If that happens, I'll be covering this from Miami. I'll lose my mind. Coffee first here. This is an interesting question. Just a couple quick things, and I promise we're going to wrap. Josh, how do they decide when or if to do a psych eval on the accused?
It comes down to what their defense is going to be. If they're going to promote any kind of a mental deficiency defense, whether that's, they were insane, they are insane, it was temporary insanity, or that somehow it's not a mental disease, but perhaps an intelligence question or something like that, you're going to want a psych eval done before they promote any of that, so that both sides can present their experts on that.
Yeah. By the way, Lee,
which is what happened in this case, because she is presenting a defense in that she was suffering from this syndrome, from battered spouse syndrome. So it is some sort of mental health issue that she had to be evaluated on.
Yeah. That's, guys, buckle in for tomorrow is all I can say, because the whole narrative is literally going to change. Narrative testimony, but the whole narrative, what happened story-wise is going to change tomorrow. I predict she's going to try to feign some tears, but we will see. Lee T here. I think we'll need a Will J sock report tweet. You got to follow me on Twitter at Podcast STS, but I'll also be live chatting in our stream. I will be more than happy to oblige with that and give you the sock update. And I might even tell him that I was doing that once the trial's over and I don't have to show back up to face him. I will tell him that I was giving a sock report, and he'll either laugh or hate me, one or the other. Jodi Arias on the stand, 18 days, Josh Ritter. They don't make trials like they used to. 18 days. That's insane. O.J. Simpson, 9-month trial. Luckily, things seem to be moving more swiftly these days. Okay, so a couple of quick things from the police interview. After she said that she heard him gurgling and basically had to she used the word stretched him out. Right after that, she kept saying, and this is a direct quote, "He and I were having an amazing time like we normally do." Then a detective asked, "How often do you play hide and seek?" When she asked that question, you could tell the jurors were kind of like, what is going on here? She goes on to say that we've maybe played hide and seek 3 times. The detective is like, in total, yes. And then probably a smart follow question is she then asked if it was sexual in nature. And she says no. And then asks, "Are you intimate with Jorge Torres?" And she says yes. And she goes, but not every single night. But she said, we like to dance with the dogs, which is another interesting statement, Josh, because in the opening, James Owens accuses Jorge Torres of abusing the dogs. That's where I draw the line. If you didn't really do that, do not drag this man's name down for saying that he was, abusing dogs if he wasn't. Are there anyone? So the Torres family had 2 people there during openings. No one has been back. Not a single person for Sarah Boone. There's no family. Very few people in the gallery, which is interesting. So one other notable comment, obviously, that got the attention, I should say, the jurors. In this police interview, Josh, the detective says, do you remember making the video? Everyone wants to know why she made the video. She says no. And the detective follows up. Why? Why don't you remember? She says, because we were drinking. To which the detective says, you just said you weren't drunk. So he's catching her in lies, and they're watching those lies. And I could tell that the jurors were like, they just got you. They just got you. She then goes on to say, I don't think I'll ever be right with everything. This just floored me, because this is now all about Jorge Torres. He died, but it's really all about Sarah Boone, who tells police, I don't think I'll ever be right with everything going on in my life. It was not intentional. I would not do that to anyone. The detective says, but you did. And he says, what was the reason for leaving him there? And she says, I will never drink alcohol again. And she keeps repeating, you guys think I did this intentionally. You guys, I think I did this intentionally. Josh, they do think she did it intentionally. And someone said she's a master gaslighter. Will the jury see through this tomorrow? Because she's undoubtedly going to bring some sort of fairy tale to the witness stand.
I don't think she's really got much of a chance. I mean, she's doing a tap dance with the investigators as it is. And now that you've added this other element of, oh, by the way, it was all self-defense into this whole thing, I just cannot imagine her coming up with any kind of a convincing narrative or argument to present to these jurors. I still do believe that at that point, I mean, when just even her own words, you guys think I meant this intentionally. I think she was so concerned at that time that they thought she was intending to kill him, that she wanted to distance herself from that so much to make it appear as though it was a horrible, tragic accident fueled by alcohol, that she really cornered herself. And now this idea of like turning it all around into being self-defense is just going to be so convoluted and so difficult to understand. Here's the delusion, though, that I think is taking place with her. The investigators asked her questions, but that's not cross-examination. When she gets on the stand, she's going to have a great old time while she's telling her story. And then when the prosecutor gets to actually cross-examine her and she can't say, I take the fifth, I want to speak to my attorney, I don't want to do this anymore, it's all going to fall apart for her. And I really feel that it's going to be a crash and burn type situation, because then all of her kind of narcissism and gaslighting and frustration, and this is the same person who burnt through 8 attorneys. That personality, I think, is really going to start to come out when she's under the rigors of cross-examination.
Yeah, by the way, I love the inside baseball. So one more follow-up to that. So she's going to be on the stand. Let's just assume she goes for, I'm just making up a number, 4 hours. Let's just say she goes all morning, all afternoon. What is the process for Will J and Dave Cacciatore? I mean, they both take notes on legal pads, which is kind of funny in this day and age, but that's the way lawyers do it. What is he kind of looking for? And how do you know what you need to cross on? I guess that's sort of the same question.
Well, cross initially is going to be just to impeach every time she's ever told a different story again. But then I imagine she's going to give him some gems during her testimony, because a lot of this is going to be the first time anybody's heard any of it. And then I think just picking apart the ridiculousness of it on its face, like all of us have been talking about. I mean, really, you were in fear of a person zipped up inside of a suitcase begging for their life? Oh, and that fear motivated you to go take a nap upstairs in a bedroom that was feet away from where this maniac was tied up inside the suitcase? I mean, when you really begin to explore it, I don't know how this prosecutor is, but I could see myself getting a little snarky and having fun with it, respectfully. But I mean, it's just so ridiculous that it's insulting to the jury. They will be offended, I think, is my assessment. I think the jury will be offended by what she's going to try to convince them of.
By the way, I will probably get hate mail for saying this. I'm just kind of thinking about it while Josh is talking. I do think both of them were raging alcoholics and violent alcoholics. Different people respond differently. And that's some of what the forensic pathologist was talking about today. Different people have different reactions to alcohol. And so I just think she was in a drunken rage and wanted to, torture him, saw this opportunity, and maybe never thought it would end up the way it did. I don't know that it was, super calculated. I think it was probably just a mess of an evening that ended up with his death, and it was her fault. Rich Buddy here says the jury won't even discuss the case. They will take an immediate vote and come back all guilty. In my opinion, it will go down that quick. We will see. Interestingly, right now it is 8:32 p.m. in Orlando, and in 58 minutes, James Owens and Tony Henderson will be arriving at the Orange County Jail here in Orlando to counsel their client about this narrative testimony tomorrow. If we haven't said it already, tune in. We will be, thank you for this, except you got to watch Courtroom Confidential. And maybe if I can convince Josh, maybe he will come on for part of this narrative testimony. I'll text you afterwards, Josh. So tune in. We are going to be streaming live. The narrative testimony is set to begin between 10 and 10:30. We'll take the whole morning. I'll be doing a lunch live with my take on, I'll really be focusing on the jury, and I'll be looking at the prosecutors to see how they react. I will give you a SOC update on Will J, and then we'll do the afternoon session, 5:30, full recap, 7 o'clock, the Adelsons. Josh Ritter, one of our best guests, and super smart guy, and it is must-see TV. Any final thoughts, Josh?
No, I'm looking. I say looking forward to. I don't mean to take away from the seriousness of this. The man lost his life, but I am looking forward to seeing what exactly she has to say for herself when she gets up to testify, because it is become so convoluted. I don't even think her attorneys can really keep track of what their defense actually is at this point. But yeah, it should be a very interesting one. Can I give a shameless plug to everybody
100%.
too before
we
I
love
go?
shameless plugs. I was about to plug my book right there.
Okay, good. Well, when you guys are done watching this, jump over to my channel, because as we were doing this, we premiered a brand new episode. We did a breakdown of the Menendez brothers, but it's not like every single other Menendez thing you've ever heard. It's all of the kind of legal issues that were at play, and I feel it's really fascinating when you understand, especially what happened between the first and the second trial and why these guys ended up in prison for the rest of their lives. So.
And the OJ trial had something to do with that. I'm definitely going to watch it.
OJ trial had a big part to do with that, I think. I really do.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. Courtroom Confidential, you're not going to meet a smarter prosecutor than Josh Ritter, who is now criminal defense. So check out Courtroom Confidential, Courtroom Confidential, Courtroom Confidential. And by the way, I've written a book. It's over my shoulder here. Has nothing to do with true crime, really. It's my mom's a Holocaust survivor. The book will change the way you look at life. It's mostly funny in a weird, twisted way. 15% Holocaust, 85% my mom screaming. Check it out. It's available anywhere books are sold. Again, it'll change the way you see life. So we will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early. Thanks again to Josh Ritter. Love you. LA, baby, and love you, Orlando. And we will see the madness unfold tomorrow live on STS. Go over to Courtroom Confidential right now. See you, everybody. See you.